wonderful West Side Day. Today it's West Side Home Day. West Side Wednesday. I like that too. So today in session we're going to do some reflection through the DCA lens. This is our last DCA session. Our outcomes for today are broader in scope in terms of reflecting and really taking the opportunity to look back at your experiences at Institute and especially honing in on those extension activities we did after each DCA session. Bring those to mind and feel free to bring those up during our reflection time. And then starting to take stock of what we have talked about, our conversations we've had, and what we've taken in experientially at our site and from interacting with the community, the students, the school, other staff, their parents and families, and projecting what our experiences might be like in our regions and how our conversations in DCA can help shape those experiences and have you have the most powerful teaching experiences you can for yourselves and your children. Again, all through our DCA lens. So what I would like to do is start with the why. Why is it important to reflect? And I know I've said this a couple of times in terms of what it means to me to be the reflective practitioner, and we will talk about how that looks in other ways tomorrow as well. But for today in particular, I want to really focus on what the reflective practitioner looks like and feels like, again, through that DCA lens, and why it's important to do that for ourselves, why it makes us stronger teachers, stronger professionals, and why it makes transformational change for our children in the end if we continue to do that. And in order to do that, I'm going to go ahead, one of my favorite books that I highly recommend if you, I know this is really a loaded statement, but if you have spare time, or if you are on a plane flight somewhere and you have the time to pick up a book that will kind of just get you grounded in what you're about to do and the experiences you might have, this is a wonderful choice, well written, and from a lot of varying perspectives, and there's something to gain for everyone, even for someone like me who's been doing this for over 20 years. Start where you are, but don't stay there. Again, if you spend any of your own pocket money on any reading, I would recommend this one. So I'm going to quote from Milner because I think it's such a great grounding space in terms of why do we reflect and why do we need to reflect from this DCA lens. So he says, and he's talking about, he's given us some, he's chronicled two teachers in particular that are in experiences much like what you're about to go into in your region, and similar to what the little that you've experienced or the brief experience you've had over Institute. And so some of the references are referring to those stories or that he lays out with those two teachers. But in general, he says reflection on race in particular should begin with the self. That is, teachers should conduct their introspective examinations before they even start to think about their students. Such self-reflection on race can help them build a positive personal racial ethnic identity and also think about how their racial identity can influence their work as teachers. And this is what we've been starting to do through our DCA sessions, this whole over Institute. And we've taken piece by piece, bit by bit, to kind of get to that place. And today we're going to culminate that process. In order to build a positive racial identity as a teacher, I have discovered that educators, and this is the author talking, all educators must engage in deep, explicit reflection in matters of race. When examining their own privilege and their experience as educators, it can be easy for teachers to engage in general self-reflection and to avoid reflecting on race altogether. Again, pinpointing the importance of really looking through that DCA lens. But it is also important for culturally diverse teachers to engage in race reflections. And this is me speaking, culturally diverse meaning all races of teachers, all backgrounds, all identities. We all need to go through this process. No one's exempt. All teachers need to think seriously about themselves as people who operate in and through systems that are shaped significantly by race and racialized mindsets. In other words, the education system here in this country. If we are going to exist and be a part of the education system in the effort for transformational change for our students, we must reflect on these things and continuing to do that. And this speaks to that as well. The potency of the exercise of reflecting about race lies in provoking analysis of such critical questions, and here's what I want you to catch. Not in the answers per se, which will vary from person to person and from situation to situation. This important reflection relates back to the idea that teaching is a journey. All right, so you're just at the very beginning. I've been doing this for over 20 years and I'm still on a journey. It's not done even for me. That's part of the reason I came back to Teach for America, is to continue to ride that wave and to continue on that path. Who knows where it'll lead me? I honestly don't think it'll ever be done. If we do it right, we'll always be in the journey. Therefore, educators should work to answer the questions more completely and accurately throughout their careers. All right? So that's the big message in this piece too. So after we've taken the time to reflect as practitioners, as teacher practitioners, what it is we have been through, what it is we're about to go through in our classroom in terms of race and identity, then we can start to look at the students. And we can start to say, okay, I've reflected on self, now let me reflect on students in terms of that DCA lens. And a little bit of what he says about that, as educators reflect on themselves and build knowledge about themselves, their experiences, and worlds related to race, they should eventually engage in reflection about their students' race and racial experiences, and also about the context in which they're teaching. And that requires, and that was a little bit of what we did in our conversation on Monday, when we looked at some of the things that were going on in the regions that you're all going to be sent to in terms of what's affecting the students that we'll be with in the fall or sooner. And so again, we can do that here. And Milner has given us some guidelines in the context of his book that we're going to use today to get at that a little bit. And lastly, teachers should begin their introspective journey about race by focusing on themselves and then transition to broader reflections about themselves in relation to others as well as to the social context. And that's the community, the students, the parents that we'll be working with. So, taking that kind of grounding for the why, we're going to go into a reflection session that I've designed to be very open-ended. And a lot of that is because, A, it is reflection, and because we all reflect a little differently, and what might work for one person might look slightly different for another person. So I've put it out there in a way that hopefully everybody can access this time. That's however is best for you. Also, I wanted to let you know, and I'll do this now, I've put a few more of my favorite reading titles up here. So in the movement, if you want to pick one up and take a look at it, or after you're done reflecting, if you're waiting for peers to have, or colleagues to have a group sharing reflection or group reflection, feel free to peruse the books. I see a hand.
Yeah, quick question. What is the book called again that you just read from?
Start Where You Are, but Don't Stay There. And I'll put this one up here too.
Thank you.
So what we're going to do, did everybody get an email with one handout? Okay, so that's the only handout we're going to be working with today, in today's session. What I've done is I've taken a couple of tables that Milner has in the book in the book that I just read from, Start Where You Are, to guide our reflection in terms of, again, through that DCA lens. And what Milner does is Milner gives us some critical questions to consider. And what you'll find is these questions should sound very familiar. There are questions we've already explored in the context of our DCA sessions, and you at various points in DCA have been asked to either pinpoint particular students or pinpoint particular parts of your identity or pinpoint particular experiences you've had and relate them to some of these critical questions. So I've given you a little more, a little beefier, a little more information on each question on this red handout on the front. And then you also have the very first section of the handout that I gave you, the first page, is where you will record, if you choose, your thoughts on these critical questions. And it's going to ask you to look at them first in terms of institute. I'll just give you an example of the first one. How does my race influence my work as an educator with my students, especially my students of color? So you'll look at that how did or how will it. So the did is the first column at institute, and the second column is when you're out in your region. So you're going to project the same critical question in two contexts. And you might use your experience from institute to drive your reflection and your response about how might that look differently. How might you build on that? Again, we're developing in this area. We're never really finished on this journey. So start to reflect on that. And you're going to go through all 8, and it's 2 tables. The second one is looking at what Milner was talking about, the student piece. So the first 4, you're looking at the teacher reflections, self-reflections on yourself as teachers. The last 4, you're looking at reflections on your students. Okay, again, through that DCA lens. And the back of this sheet corresponds to the second sheet on your handout. And what that's asking you to do is to look at, Milner in the book has given a summary of teachers' mindsets and practices that address opportunity gaps. I'd like you to read through those on this red sheet and then start to make connections, because you will just, as much as I did, because you should start to see some of the DCA competencies within some of these mindsets and some of these practices that teachers did that make them successful teachers when dealing with issues of opportunity gap. And again, creating that transformational change for students. And the way Milner came at those mindsets and practices were through the first, the 2 stories that he tells about the 2 teachers in particular in the first section of the book. He starts to pull out what it is that these teachers did and the mindsets they had that made them successful in working with students in their class across lines of identity and such. And so those are outlined. And at the bottom, I also wrote in the diversity competencies so that you can focus on those in particular as well. So it's going to look the same. Which of those things were you able to employ during Institute? How? Why? What led up to it? Whatever it is that is resonating with you as you're thinking about it, as you're reflecting. And then the second column is what might that look in your region. And also as you do that, what I'd like you to consider is where are your strengths? Because you're going to find this is a beefy list. It's kind of long, but we're going to have strengths in some of these, and then others we're going to say, oh, I'm still developing in that area. Maybe the interpersonal, maybe it's locus of control. Whatever it is that you identify is an area that you're going to commit to working on in your region, and go ahead and jot that down for your personal reference too. And maybe what I'm hoping is that we'll have time for you to start to reflect on or have a conversation about action steps that you can take as you build competency in the mindsets and practices that lead to transformational change for our students, again, through that DCA lens. So the red sheet is really informational for you. What I would suggest you do is, as you go through the worksheet that I've given you, use the red sheet to kind of give more background information if need be. I'd like for you to take I think I said 15 minutes, but let's toy with that a little, 5 to 10, and make that your independent reflection. Okay, and then after 10 minutes, let's do some sharing if you like, and that's the optional piece. If you are feeling like you need to do more independent reflections, go right ahead. We can go out here if we're kind of quiet. I think we've been pretty successful with managing that. So if it helps for you to go to another space, that's fine too. Let's come back at about 10 till. So after you've done your 10 minutes of personal reflection, feel free to either pair up or group up with somebody who is also done or in a place where you are, and if you feel like that's going to work for you, do that. And again, I want this to be very free form so that you can make it useful to yourselves. It might look different for one pair, different for another group, different for an individual, so you get to decide. But 10 minutes of self-reflection for sure, and then the rest of the time, however you'd like to use it, either groups or combined. Any questions? Does everybody access the document pretty well? All right. It's all you.
Say go.